welcome back to another video on the no-code fundamental pillars, and in this video we're going to be talking about UI and UX, in other words the look and feel of your app. Now in the first video we're going to talk about what it is, what UI is, what UX is, a few tips to get you going, but in subsequent videos I'm going to go through the various different UI components that are available to create your app and how you can style them. I'll also go through repeating data lists, which are just really a powerful fundamental a no-code component that you're going to use again and again for doing lots of really interesting stuff. And then I'm even going to take you through various different interfaces that exist out there already and just try to give you a quick flavour of how they fit together, how you kind of get there. And the reason for that is I really want you to be able to understand how you go from having a blank canvas into having a beautiful intricate design like lots of the apps out there that you use today already have. Now if you're a designer, a lot of this is going to be really intuitive. I'm certainly not going to give you many design tips, but you'll understand how the design knowledge you've already got can apply to no code. On the other hand, if you're a bit like me and you were starting out your no-code journey without any design experience, this video is absolutely aimed at you and it's going to help you just understand how to go from 0 to 1. So let's get started. Now, when most people think about apps, usually the first thing that springs to mind is the screens, how does it look, what colour is it, etc, the visuals. And as we kind of discussed about previously, we have this concept of front end, and a front end is just anything which allows a user to interact with, the rest of your app. And typically that will be something visual, like a mobile app, a website, etc. But it could also be something like an Alexa skill, an Apple Watch app, etc, etc. Now, whenever we talk about visuals within the front end, the term that we use is user interface. In other words, UI. And that's just really about how does it look, what branding is on it, what colours are on it, what UI components make it up, has it got a table, has it got an image, has it got a button, what does the user interact with? And what you're looking at right now is a great example. We've got text right over there, we've got an image, that image has got some nice rounded corners, it's got a background, it's got a shadow underneath it, you might not be able to see that on your screen. But all of these kind of aspects come under what we discuss as UI. Now we also have UX, and that stands for user experience, and it's a wee bit more abstract, a little bit more kind of complicated, a bit more conceptual as I've written there, but it is just as, if not more so, important than UI. Now the way I define user experience, and again if you're a designer watching this you might immediately disagree with me, but I refer to it as the way that an app feels. And so if UI is about how it looks and how it looks to a user, then UX is about how it makes that user feel. And let me give you an example. Have you ever filled out a form on a website and you've spent 15 minutes on it, 20 minutes, maybe it's some sort of long administrative form, and you've got right down to the end, you've hit, okay, submit that form, and it comes up and says, sorry, it timed out, we'll have to reload the page, and you've lost all of your data that you entered. That's a pretty common thing, less common thankfully now in 2021, but that happened to me tons of times over the last few years, and it made me feel terrible, it really annoyed me, really frustrated me, and if I had the option, most times I would decide not to continue using the app. That is a great example of bad UX and what you shouldn't do. On the other hand, good UX is really about, how are you making that user feel? Are they enjoying the journey they're taking in your app? Are they going to recommend this app? And UX is going to be really different for every type of app out there. It's going to be really specific to your particular use case or business idea. But the things you can think about are, if I've given the user an error, for example, as I've demonstrated on the screenshot here, am I making it obvious why that was? Have I just told them, sorry, something went wrong, figure it out? Or have I made it easy? On the other hand, am I making it really simple for the user to get value out of my app? Can they find the buttons they've got to press? Can they find the right information? Is it easy for them to navigate and find things? We'll talk about some more kind of aspects that you can think about later on, but that's just a good way to frame UX. Is the user going to go away feeling frustrated, or are they going to go away feeling absolutely delighted? And just to give you a little bit of a kind of example from my experience, I think a company that are really good at doing this are Apple with their iPhone and that kind of thing. Now, if you look at an Android phone, typically it's going to be quicker, it's going to have more features. Usually everything that an iPhone does, an Android phone could do 2 years earlier, and that's amazing. And you might not be a massive Apple fan, but bear with me here through the analogy. Typically an iPhone just feels a little bit nicer to use. The interface is a little bit closer together, it's a little bit more thought through, it just feels easy. But where Apple really excel is the integration between software and hardware, and this is something they're really well known for. Now the example that really brings it to life for me is Bluetooth earphones. If you've ever used, well, first of all, if you've ever used anything with Bluetooth, Bluetooth is a frustrating technology. You'll probably find anything you connect to through Bluetooth breaks a lot. You've got to repair it, you've got to reset it, etc. That's a great example of a bad UX on its own. But up until the AirPods come out, on an iPhone, you would get Bluetooth headphones from whatever company it might be. You would connect them. Hopefully it would work the first time. Then you'd go through the Bluetooth menu, you'd select it, and then it might all work. And then every single time that you want to use your earphones, you simply open your app, put Bluetooth on, pick the earphones, put them in your ears, good to go. Okay experience, pretty frustrating whenever it goes wrong, but when it works, it works. Now bring in the Apple AirPods. The minute they come in, Apple put a specific chip in their iPhone that worked especially with AirPods and made the whole process really easy. I don't have to go in, I don't have to pair it with a menu, it doesn't drop, it's not patchy. All that happens is, I take my AirPods, I flip the case open, I put them in my ear and done. That's literally all it takes. And so, in reality that's probably saved me, 10 seconds every time I use them? Maybe over of a comparison over a month, it probably takes me 2 minutes less to use AirPods than it does Bluetooth earphones every day. And it's such a simple thing, and yet the difference is with Bluetooth earphones I stopped using them, and with AirPods I now recommend them to everybody I know who has an iPhone. I'm the first person to say, look how easy it is, give it a try, flick the case open, put them in your ears and done. And to me that just really encapsulates the difference. A user experience that's done right is one that is going to delight a user, one that they're going to walk away loving. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing an iPhone or whether you're building, the simplest stopwatch or to-do app. Anything you can do that's going to make that more enjoyable, almost fun or playtime to use, is going to be a massive win for you and your business. And after all, AirPods alone for Apple, it's a several $billion business, 12 billion a year, something like that they make. So UX is really, really hard to quantify, but clearly when it's done right, it is worth a lot of money for an app business. So let's start jumping into some kind of concepts and important things to know. Now, one of the really big ones I wanted to pull out is this idea of responsive design. And essentially, one of the challenges that you have when you're building things on the internet is everybody's screen size is different. Everyone's got a different size of phone, everyone's got a different size of laptop. I'm designing this right now on a 13-inch laptop. You might be watching it on a 15-inch, you might have a desktop that's got 24 inches, so on and so forth. And so the problem is when you're designing something, you do not know what size your user's screen is going to be. Now, thankfully, the internet has largely solved the problem of making one website that works on any screen size, and it's called responsive design. And the basic principle is this, and again, if you're really into design or if you're a developer yourself, you might cringe at this explanation, but let's keep it really simple. The basic principle of responsive design is, rather than deal in absolutes and say, okay, this image should be 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall, we instead work in percentages. We say, this image should take up 33% of the screen, this button should take up 2% of the screen, whatever it might be. Now, that's not to say that you should always use percentages, and you might not, you can still use pixels, but it's about finding the right time to use it in the right place. Now, if you have a look at the example here, this is in a tool called Webflow that you're going to see in the next video, and it's a NoCode.Tech website, and as I click through, I'm clicking from laptop to tablet to mobile, and as I do that, you can see that the design kind of stays the same. It's the same look and feel, but as it comes in, it changes, it adapts round, and just really adapts to the new screen size. And so the way you do that is, instead of saying, that big rectangle should be X number of pixels, you start to set percentages, you start to play around with it, you start to say, okay, at tablet it should look like this, at mobile it should look like that. And really, it's just about having a design that is flexible depending on the person using it. Now, that can sound a little bit complicated. The main rule to remember, two things actually, is number one, pretty much just use percentages rather than pixels for any of your big moving pieces, like like this big rectangle I've got here, like some of your bigger pieces of text, and you'll broadly be okay. On the other hand, most no-code tools will take care of this for you, especially on mobile. On mobile, a lot of the tools that I can think of already take care of it. You don't have to think about it too much, although I'll go into a bit of nuance there soon. But broadly, just think about, if I design this on my screen at this size and I extend my screen to be that size, how does it look? And probably the best way to do that, by the way, is just resize your browser window. Just make the window bigger, make it smaller, and see how your design looks as you go. As I say, most no-code tools will take care of this for you, but it's a really good thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about UI. Now, in terms of a couple of things to think about, I mean, yeah, responsive design is most prominent on the web. You're going to have to worry about this less on mobile. You're probably not going to have to worry about it on stuff like an Apple Watch, etc. Depending on where you're building your app for, it just might not be that big a deal. But if it's a web app, this is going to be a front and center UI issue for you. On mobile though, using a percentage rather than a pixel, it's still pretty important. Not every no-code tool is going to take care of it. Some of them will just put the screen size up and down depending on how you've done it with pixels or percentages. But thankfully, as I say, a lot of them will take care of it. Adalo, who are a tool I keep going back to, for example, they take care of it for you. I believe Glide do as well. Now, one other difference to kind of point out between the web, and when I say the web, it could be a website, a landing page, a web app, etc. But one big difference essentially between the web and on mobile is this idea of pages. Now, if you think about it, quite often if you go to a website, you'll go to the home page, but you might often go to a different page. With NoCode.Tech, maybe you found us by hitting the home page, maybe you went to the education page, maybe you ended up in a tutorial, maybe you ended up on a tool, all sorts of different ways you can come into the website, and at any time you can go to that top bar in your web browser and you can type in a new address and go there, or you can go to a bookmark or whatever else. So each page is quite individual and a user can arrive at that page any way they like. On the other hand, mobile apps have this kind of idea of screens, and it's quite different. Every person who downloads your mobile app is going to end up on the same screen. They're going to end up probably on a welcome page, maybe on a login page, something like that, a sign up page, and then they're going to end up on your home page, and then they're going to end up on really whatever screen you choose based on the buttons they click. They can't ever stop on a mobile app and type in, go to this page. It just doesn't exist, and therefore you have to think really carefully about the flow through your app. On web, yeah, sure, it's a little bit easier. You still have to think about flow, but people can kind of go where they like. But on your mobile app, you really have to guide them through a set journey. But the one thing to remember on a web app is occasionally somebody is going to randomly show up on a page you didn't expect them to. Maybe they bookmark it, maybe their friend sends them a link. But let's say you've got a sign-up form where the user goes through page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, where you collect more and more details about them. Always keep in mind that your user might accidentally somehow end up starting on page 3, and so how are you making sure that you reset that process, get them back to the beginning and make it nice and easy? Just something to bear in mind. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about UI kind of do's and don'ts later as we go through the videos. But first, let's talk a little bit about UX, because we're not going to see a huge amount more than this slide on this. And the reason for that is just because, as you'll see as we go through this, it's really individual, it's really unique. It's more about you figuring out how your app works for others. It's really hard to give more generic advice that applies to all apps, but I'm going to give a go at it here. So no matter what you are designing for, the first thing to do, and it's kind of building on that last point in the previous slide, is make it easy to navigate. Is it easy to navigate? Is it easy for people to access your core functionality? And when I say core functionality, if you were Uber, then your core functionality is booking a taxi. If you are Facebook, your core functionality is posting an update. If you're Twitter, it's tweeting, etc., etc. And so whatever you want your users to do in the app, whatever is going to get them the most value that justifies downloading your app, paying you, whatever it might be, whatever is going to get you that value, you have to think about, is it easy for them to do that and to get there? And probably most importantly, is there a way that you can reduce the number of steps taken? Now, I've said that the answer is usually yes, because typically when people design it and then when people actually use it, it's very, very different. When you design it out on paper, it all makes sense. When you actually use it, people feel like they're clicking through one screen and another screen and another screen. And so typically, you can reduce the steps taken. You can take your most important functionality, for example, and put it on your homepage, or maybe you can actually design your app so that they don't have to log in before they use it. Maybe there's some things they can do, you know, get them a little bit interested before they end up actually having to give you their email, their password, and signing up. So again, it's not going to be applicable to every app out there, but it's just a good thing to kind of think about. And actually, it ties neatly into the next point around about a call to action. So a call to action, or a CTA as we call it for short, is essentially what is the one action that you are asking the user to do on every page or every screen. If they're come to your website, you probably have a sign up button or a pay now button, or, you know, in other words, something that when a user hits your website, you really want them to do it. And so the important thing here is, on every single page and screen you've got, is it really obvious what the user should do next? Are you guiding them through a journey? Is it obvious what they need to do to move the app on? And if it is obvious, is there anything you're doing to distract them? You know, is there two different things they could do? Is there three? Is there loads of text to read when actually you just need them to hit a button? A really good example of this is Amazon. If you go on Amazon, you've got a nav bar and it lets you to browse all departments, see your orders, etc. But when you place all your items into a basket and you try to check out, Amazon suddenly clears up the interface, and all you can really see is delivery option, address, payment options, and buy. It takes away the nav bar, it takes all the superfluous elements away from around it, because the real idea is just to try and keep the user focused on the task at hand. And so that's a really good thing to keep in your head. You know, on every screen, is it obvious what the user should do? And is the screen helping keeping them focused? Now, you're going to probably end up with a lot of screens that have got room for user error. A sign-up form's the best example, as I showed a couple of slides ago in that screenshot. But when something can go wrong, are you showing clear and obvious error messages? Is it obvious why it went wrong? Are you telling them how to rectify it? Are you showing them where to go if it still doesn't work and they need support? Make it obvious, don't make your user think. And that's a really good principle to keep in mind. Anything that makes the user have to stop and think is an opportunity for them to decide to leave your app, and that is always a big worry. No matter what you use, even if you build a bank, if you're building a stopwatch app, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't matter what you're building, you are always competing with the more fun apps on their phone or on their desktop. You know, do they actually decide, this is too complicated, I'm going to go and browse Twitter, I'm going to go and browse TikTok? This is what you now face in 2021, is you're not just competing with apps that are your competitors for attention, you are competing with all apps. The more fun they are, the more likely they are to jump over to them and use your app. So anything that you can do to keep the user on task, stop making them think, that's really going to help your user experience. One other thing here, I'm just going to move the beautiful little picture of me up to the corner. One other thing here, at any point are you asking them to re-enter information that they've already given you? Now this might sound like a really obvious one. Why would you do that? Well, the truth is it happens quite a lot. You know, if you've already got their personal details, are there screens where you're asking them to re-enter their personal details? A great example would be an e-commerce store. If you already have them signed up and you know their address, have you just asked for it again at checkout, or have you pre-used it? Think about the little areas where this might happen. It's less about, you know, most people when they're building an app don't tend to remake people put in, you know, details at the beginning and then details at checkout or something key like that. It tends to be the smaller details in the background, the secondary functionality, where people end up having to repeat themselves, and that's where they can get frustrated. And then one last one here that is worth kind of pointing out, I think it's a really interesting one, is if you think about a phone, and I'm just going to take mine out, you know, think about the user's position on the phone. Think about where their hand's going to be. Most people hold their phone like this. So I'm holding it like that, as you know. And so I'm picking things with, I don't know if you can see that, sorry, I'm picking things with my thumb. And so it's really easy for me to hit things with my thumb down here. That's simple. But if I want to go up here, I've got to tilt it. And see how I'm pulling the phone away? I've got to tilt to get up here. I've got to tilt to get up to this corner. And so it's just really that idea of anything that you have in this bottom half is going to be really easy to access. Anything up here is going to be hard. And so if you're designing an app, you want your user to be hitting a pay now button down here. You want to be hitting a menu button down here, because the minute they have to hit up here, it's going to be really difficult for them to stretch their thumb to go there. You don't want a user even having to use their second hand. And I think that's not only a really, really good tip that you should continue thinking about, but it is also a really, really good tip for just in general the intricacy that you can get into with UX. Now, I'm not saying be mega meticulous and spend all your time on it if you've not even launched your app yet, but it's a great idea of the different problems people can run into. And there's all sorts of other stuff there, like accessibility. Is your app usable for somebody who is colourblind, for example? Is your app usable for somebody who is perhaps dyslexic and struggles reading words? And one other thing to point out, there's a really interesting book about this. I'm going to try and put it in the description because I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. But, I've just demonstrated how hard it is for me to reach up there with my hands. Now, I've got fairly big hands because I am a man, a fairly tall man, and I've got big hands. People don't often think about, for example, what if a woman is using an app who has slightly smaller hands than a man? What if a child is using an app who has slightly smaller hands than a woman? There are all sorts of biases that you will have built in depending on who you are, depending on what you know. A great example for me is throughout these lessons, I am almost certainly given examples which are, for example, more relevant to somebody in a Western nation rather than somewhere else, or I'll probably be, just like what I did with the thumb there, I said the top of the screen, really difficult to get to with your hand. If you're a man, that's true. If you're a woman, actually probably half the screen could be difficult to get to if you're using a large phone. So, it's just an example of think really hard about who your app is for. If you are building an app for a woman, for example, or which is aimed at children, have you got somebody with that kind of size of hands to look at? If you're building an app for people who may end up being colourblind, are people who are colourblind testing it? Does it work right? It's just worth keeping all these biases in mind and trying to figure out where your experience might be less frustrating than somebody else's. It's quite a difficult thing. As I say, there's a book that's out there about it that's really interesting. I will pop it in the description below. So last thing to talk about is UI components. Now, when you have a user interface, it is made up of lots of different components. On this screen here, we've got a box. That box has got a border with a colour. We've got a big heading up here. We've got lots of different types of text down here, bullet points, etc. You're going to have a bunch of these components. That's what's going to structure your app. And so typically the way a UI is put together is you structure the app with large components like a box, and then you style each component you kind of within your UI. So you might add a shadow, you might change the colour, you might add a border to it, etc. So typically you'll do that, and then you might have some wee extras on top like an animation or that kind of thing. Now the good thing is most websites, most apps out there kind of use the same components. When I show you a button in the next lesson, you're going to know exactly what it is, because you would have struggled to get onto this page, for example, without using a button. So these components are really, really common across, whether you're programming or no code across the web. And as a result, most no code tools have the same library, or the library is really, really similar. Now, I'm going to demonstrate these in the next video using a tool called Webflow. Webflow is probably the least done for you. You've got to do much of the work yourself, whereas if you're going to use something like Adalo, it'll be a little bit easier. You'll have to think less about where your components go. It makes it just much easier to do for a non-technical person. But on the other hand, you've got less flexibility, there's less you can do, and that's something you'll kind of find throughout no-code tools. Generally there's a balance between flexibility and ease of use. If you've got an app that's really, really flexible, it's probably going to take a bit for a non-technical person to get their head around it and really get into it. And subsequently, if you are a designer, for example, you're probably going to find a lot of no-code tools quite restrictive versus your ideas. So it's always going to take a bit of experimentation. But what we'll do, we'll jump into the next lesson, we'll talk about the various different types of components that are available, and we'll really just go through a bit of a demo. I'll show you what they are, I'll show you how you can style them, and hopefully come away from it just understanding how it all fits together.